Trapped in a hurricane. Trapped by an avalanche. Trapped on open water. When severe weather strikes, there's nowhere to hide.
Go, 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 go!
These are the stories from people who work in extreme weather.
We just lost a big window.
It was just like a bomb went off.
And nobody is coming to save you.
And the storms they'll never forget.
Wham! Crack! Bang! Bang! Bang!
Holy we're going to die.
Plus, the how and why behind the world's worst weather.
Mother Nature is one mother.
For the brave men and women who make their living in the face of wild weather, fear and danger are part of the job.
On our doorstep, we're gonna try to keep it at bay.
But when you're trapped and there's nowhere to run, it's never just another day at the office. September 2014, Hurricane Odile slams Mexico's Baja Peninsula, near the popular resort town of Cabo San Lucas. Odile packs wind speeds of over 140 miles an hour, strong enough to lift people and even cars off the ground. Those who can flee the rampaging storm, but a few, like Josh Morgerman, race towards it.
I've been chasing hurricanes since I was basically a kid. There's no way to describe why violent weather just gets me so excited, why I feel this need to just go hunting after it at great personal risk. Every hemisphere, north, south, east, west, wherever the big storms are happening, the really scary ones, I'm there.
He thought he'd seen it all. But even Josh was not prepared for what happened. The night Hurricane Odile struck Cabo San Lucas.
I've been inside the jaws of about 35 or 40 hurricanes. This day was one of the worst.
Hurricanes are the deadliest weather events Mother Nature can dish out. They're rotating tropical storms with winds of at least 74 miles an hour. Each year, hurricanes wipe out entire coastal areas and kill thousands of people.
A hurricane requires several ingredients in order to form. The main ingredient here is that the sea surface temperatures need to be at least 26.5 degrees centigrade. Once these warm temperatures occur, the surface begins to evaporate and the water condenses into clouds. Because of this condensation, heat is released into the atmosphere. This is warming the ocean even further and requiring it to evaporate more, creating more clouds, eventually into severe thunderstorms. With all of these thunderstorms that are now popping up, they begin to rotate in a counterclockwise direction. At this stage, a hurricane is born.
At home in Los Angeles, Josh tracks a storm gathering over the Pacific Ocean, just southwest of Mexico.
I was not initially very interested in it. The computer model suggested it was gonna miss the west coast of Mexico, that it was gonna stay offshore. So I was basically just kind of ignoring it. But then as the days passed, the computer model started to shift closer and closer, and they showed maybe it actually was gonna threaten. Then the day before, I realized, oh boy, I gotta get down there fast.
We gotta go.
My cameraman and I flew down to Cabo San Lucas late in the afternoon that the hurricane hit. We were one of the very last planes to land before the airport closed down. That's how close we cut it. The second we landed, it was almost like the hurricane started to hit. There was a heavy rain band move through and strong winds, and I was like, wow, I can't believe we even landed. Hurricane was already moving in on the city. As a hurricane chaser, I want to get right in the center of the hurricane, right where the eye is going to cross the coast. But we were trying to kind of anticipate where we thought that center was going to cross the coast.
Hola, it's under Josh Morgerman, checking in.
And that brought us to a hotel just east of downtown Cabo San Lucas. And that's where we set up shop.
Meet downstairs, say 30 for a drink? Yeah, sure.
And as it turned out, it was a bullseye hit.
It was the prime area and the prime ingredients and the prime time for this hurricane. September is the most active season for hurricanes to form. So with very high sea surface temperatures, well above 26.5 degrees centigrade, Hurricane Odile managed to go from a tropical storm all the way to a Category 4 hurricane in a very short amount of time.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen, all for free. No subscription required. Download Veely now.
Category 4 winds are powerful enough to uproot trees, tear roofs off houses, and blow windows out of buildings.
Very late in the afternoon, it started to get really stormy. We just kind of drove around, just took some shots of the wind blowing. As it started to get dark, the weather started to get worse. It started to feel kind of dangerous.
By 7 p.m., winds are blowing at more than 50 miles an hour, threatening to snap palm trees in half.
This was a pretty strong hurricane coming, and we decided it was probably best to retreat back to the hotel. As it turned out, we were retreating right to the bullseye.
Hey, grab that ring.
Josh and his cameraman hole up in the lobby to ride out the storm.
Keep it at bay. It's gonna get a little crazy, so we're gonna try to keep everyone down low.
As the evening wore on, the wind got stronger. It was like around 9 or 10 that it started to feel really serious. The whole building just started to rattle, and there were just crashing sounds outside. What that is flying debris. So as other buildings start to blow apart, that stuff blows around, and when it hits the building you're in, you hear it. It's like crashing sounds.
The wind rages and threatens to blow a set of glass doors off its hinges.
The front doors of the lobby just blew open, and the hotel manager put a sofa in front of it. And that just wasn't heavy enough. And throughout the course of the next hour, we kept piling furniture against those doors. Another sofa, a couple of chairs. And we could not keep the wind out.
Can we get some help over it?
Once that wind gets in the building, it could actually start doing internal destruction. So it's very important to keep it out. And that's why we were working so hard to try somehow to keep those doors closed.
It's no use. Hurricane Odile sweeps the barricade aside, allowing wind and rain to rush into the lobby.
Those doors blew open, and the wall on the other side blew out, and actually the wind was moving in a straight line. Basically, the lobby became a wind tunnel.
The problem with Odile was that along the Baja California Peninsula, many people did not take this storm seriously. Hurricanes that form in this area tend to be pushed out to sea. Unfortunately, the National Hurricane Center relayed this information saying, "We're not worried, we are not concerned about this storm at the moment." And because of this, warnings were completely canceled. It wasn't until about 24 hours prior to Odile making landfall that the warnings started to go up. By the time the warnings were out, it was game over.
For 2 hours, winds hammer the lobby, terrorizing guests and staff. An unexpected calm settles over the hotel.
It just got really quiet all of a sudden. That was the eye of the hurricane. The exact center of a hurricane is called the eye. It's a circular area and it's calm. Now, the worst part of the hurricane, the most violent winds, are in a ring around that eye. That's called the eye wall. So when you get into the eye, you're halfway through the hurricane, only halfway. You have the other half coming. So during the eye, it calmed down. I walked outside in the parking lot and I was just shocked by the destruction.
This building really took a beating. This was a scary storm.
The outside of the hotel just looked like piranhas had attacked it. The parking lot was just covered in debris. Cars were smashed just from falling branches. It was a mess.
Despite the destruction, Josh knows the worst is yet to come.
You never know how long that calm is gonna last, and that creates this weird uncertainty.
The eye's passing and we're going back into the hurricane.
When those winds come back on the backside of the hurricane, they come back fast, and you have very little time to take cover.
September 2014, Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. Hurricane chaser Josh Morgerman is trapped inside a hotel as a deadly storm literally tears the building apart.
The hurricane's coming in right here.
We're in the backside of the hurricane, and the wind is really, really roaring. We're just standing there, and all of a sudden, boom. The only way I could describe it was just like a bomb went off. A whole glass wall of the lobby just exploded in the wind. I mean, exploded. Holy I don't think I've ever been so surprised or caught off guard in any hurricane I've been in. I've been in so many hurricanes, but I've never just seen such incredible just destruction happen in an instant like that. Suddenly, glass debris flying everywhere. My legs are covered in blood. Got my leg. We realized that we can't stay in that lobby. It's just turning into a wind tunnel with just like this debris, like just flying around, smashing into the walls. I mean, it was like, whoa. So we ran into the office, which was next to us. We shut the doors. And then I realized, okay, we're in trouble. The office is all glass windows facing the wind, and they're just heaving. You could just like literally see the glass pulsing. There's nothing to hide under. There's nowhere to take cover. We were basically rats in a death trap. We couldn't stay in that office. And I remember we opened that door and the wind was just roaring through it. And I remember sort of like, you know, just counting to 3 and then just running. The hotel manager and I dove under a desk, the reception desk. I mean, it was just literally, it was like pure instinct at this point. Like I wasn't even thinking. I was pretty freaked out. And I've been in a lot of hurricanes, and when I'm scared, it's serious. The wind was just blowing through, and it was tearing away the ceiling, the walls. Just debris flying, smashing into the walls at incredible speeds. The force of the wind was so great that you could just, you know, you could feel the walls shaking. At that point, I started not to trust the building. I started to, like, wonder if this whole thing wasn't gonna come crashing down on us. We needed to somehow get out of there and get into an interior hallway. Unfortunately, to do that, we'd have to run across the lobby, which had become a wind tunnel. The floor was slippery. I totally wiped out. We were lucky, you know, we dodged the flying debris and we got into like a stairwell and then we felt safe.
Josh knows the stairwell in the building's interior is one of the safest places to be during the hurricane.
It's usually a little more structurally solid. Once we got there, I felt like, okay, we made it.
What made Hurricane Odile so destructive was not only was it a Category 4 at peak strength, it was the fact that residents and even visitors to the island had very little preparation time. In many cases, they took refuge in their hotels and their resort areas, which are not built to withstand these winds. And this is why we saw immense damage.
So once we made it into that stairwell, because the destruction was everywhere, at that point, the hurricane was still going full throttle, and you just wondered, God, when was this thing gonna end? Finally, the wind started to decrease just a little bit.
Wow. Get a load of this.
We lost a lot of equipment. We were both like bleeding and just kind of banged up a little bit, but I was just so glad he was okay and we were okay.
We survived it, but the hotel didn't.
In the end, Hurricane Odile claimed the lives of 18 people and caused well over $1 billion in damage.
The lessons that we take away from Hurricane Odile are that we're human. We can't forecast perfectly where a hurricane is going to go. The biggest mistake that we made was that the National Hurricane Center did say and relay the information to Baja California that Odile was going to stay far away from land. Instead, it made a direct hit.
Chasing hurricanes comes with fear. That's part of it. You're always like a little scared. But Odile was one of the few times where I just felt like, wow, everything is out of control. It was just this visceral fear, and I felt that very few times in my many years of chasing. That feeling of being trapped, I'll never forget that. It was a day that weather changed my life.
When extreme weather strikes, its aftermath can be catastrophic. Towns wiped out, lives lost. Trapped inside the jaws of a hurricane, the best defense is to take cover and weather the storm. But sometimes, riding out a savage storm can leave you in the direct path of a totally different catastrophe. Mount Logan, North America's second highest peak. In Canada's frozen Arctic, it stands supreme. On these icy slopes, wind and cold team up to intensify the deadly effects of winter weather. The mountain's ice and snow have never melted. Severe snowstorms can strike its peak at any time of year. But despite advancements in weather science, predicting these storms isn't easy. The last thing you want on Mount Logan is to be trapped there.
The mountains are also a hard place to observe the weather because it changes so dramatically from the valley to the top, and we only usually have one observing site anywhere near it. So we will miss things that are high up in the mountains or in a valley away from where the weather stations are.
For alpine adventurers who dare to scale its peak, volatile Arctic weather can quickly turn Mount Logan into a frozen grave.
I travel around the world and I climb mountains in remote locations. I've climbed in Iran and Iraq. I've climbed all over South America and Asia. I'm the only Canadian that's climbed Everest without oxygen. I love challenging the outdoors.
Laval Saint-Germain has conquered the highest peaks on 6 of the world's 7 continents. But in 2003, an attempt to summit Mount Logan brought him to the brink of death. The sky is clear as Laval and his climbing partner touch down on the glacier at the base of Mount Logan, the launching pad for their ascent up the mountain.
I've climbed all over the world, and I'll never forget first seeing Mount Logan. It is very intimidating. It's one of the largest mountains on Earth when it comes to surface area. It stands up high above all the peaks around it. Big rock faces with ice falls hanging off, and you're constantly seeing avalanches even as you fly in. In Logan, of course, it's the biggest considerations are rockfall and avalanche hazard, because you're climbing in serious avalanche terrain. And it's extremely remote.
Once an avalanche stops, the snow settles like concrete, making it nearly impossible to move. More than 90% of avalanche victims survive if dug out within 15 minutes. Anytime after that, survival rates drop dramatically. Avalanches kill more than 150 people worldwide each year. Most are snowmobilers, skiers, and snowboarders. Laval spent months preparing for what would be a grueling expedition to the top of the mountain.
Preparation for high altitude mountaineering, like Mount Logan, where it's extremely cold, it's equipment is key. And you have to make sure you have warm footwear, warm sleeping bags. You have to have the proper gear. You can be climbing at minus 35 degrees and sweating profusely, but as soon as you stop, you can, within minutes, become hypothermic.
But being prepared means they have more than 100 pounds of gear, too much to haul up the mountain at once.
When you do these remote, big climbs, you're on your own, and it's a real commitment. I mean, nowadays, obviously, we have satellite phones. We can call for help. We can call for a pickup, so you're not quite as exposed as you used to be. But it's not simply arriving at the base of the mountain and climbing to the top, skiing back down or walking back down and coming out again. It's over 100-pound backpacks, so heavy that you can't climb with them. So what you end up doing is you end up yo-yoing up the mountain. So you'll carry gear up to a certain point, leave it there, come back down, sleep at your tent. Next morning, pack up everything, weather permitting, and climb up to where you left the gear before. You camp there, and you just keep doing this up and down. So you end up climbing the mountain 3 times, probably, on most climbs, because you just have too much equipment. But you need that equipment, because you need that food and that fuel and that cold weather gear to climb it.
There's no ideal time to scale Mount Logan. Extreme weather has stranded many climbers atop its icy ridges. Strong winds packed with moisture collect over the North Pacific, then swing inland, where they're forced up Mount Logan's 6-mile-high peak.
As we move up through the atmosphere, it will get colder and colder and colder. Up in mountains, the precipitation that might be rain down low will be snow up high. And also, because it's cold up there, it will stay longer, so we see more snow on the mountains.
Laval and his partner begin their climb up Logan's treacherous icy slopes, sidestepping deadly crevasses that they could easily fall into. They're just halfway up the mountain, still days from the summit, when bad weather rolls in.
It started to snow heavily. We were at a point where we had taken just enough food and fuel to last us 1 or 2 nights.
Weather's getting worse, it's picking up. We're gonna have to make camp for the night. Let's head up that way.
We realized that the snow was coming down so heavily, we're in such an exposed, avalanche-prone area that we couldn't go back down to get our stuff. So we were stuck in the tent.
Avalanches are most common during and immediately after a fresh snowfall. The savage storm has put them in the path of one of nature's deadliest weapons.
We had enough food and fuel for a few days, but it was snowing so heavily that every 2 hours we'd have to take turns going out and shoveling off the outside of the tent because we were getting buried in snow.
Machine gun winds rattle the tent. If it folds under the weight of the snow, they'll be critically exposed to the elements.
The walls slowly collapse and then we shovel it off, and they slowly collapse and we shovel it off. And then you're covered in snow, and then you have to come into the tent and you brush the snow off your body so that you don't bring this wet snow into the tent, which is really dangerous because if your sleeping bag gets wet, it's not going to dry ever up there.
Trapped for 24 hours, The savage storm continues to bear down on them. They're cold, hungry, and running out of fuel for their camp stove. Without it, they won't survive.
We use a mountaineering stove. It creates a small flame, and you pack an aluminum pot with snow and you melt it, and that gives you drinking water. Either that or you don't have any water. The stove is critical.
Perched on an exposed ledge, Laval and his partner are in danger. They know an avalanche could strike at any time, sweeping them over the slope and down the mountainside. They have no choice but to try and wait out the storm.
This is eating at me. We're in an area where an avalanche could have been triggered above the tent. And of course, it could be triggered by us as we leave the tent. So we were stuck there.
Mount Logan, an icy peak in Canada's frozen Arctic. High in the clouds, blizzards and severe snowstorms strike without warning. And cold is a constant threat. In high winds, 0 degrees Fahrenheit feels like -30. Laval St. Germain and his climbing partner are trapped on the mountain, locked in a battle against extreme weather. As powerful winds from the Pacific batter their tent with blowing snow.
Walls slowly collapse and we shovel it off, and they slowly collapse and we shovel it off. We kept on doing this, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat.
They're low on food and fuel to melt snow for water. They have no choice. It's move or die.
We're at a point where we can't go any higher because we don't have enough food and fuel to go higher. There's no way we can go to the summit and back down the other side. We made the decision to try and go down for our food and our fuel.
But to do that, they make their predicament even worse.
We left the tent together, and I was very nervous about it. I was extremely gripped that we were going to cause an avalanche.
When snow falls to the ground, it quickly bonds under its own weight to form a solid mass. But sometimes, new snowfall doesn't bond to this hard, icy layer below. When that bonding fails, watch out.
The trigger mechanism is just that extra bit of snow added on the top, so it destabilizes, and we could get an avalanche.
Laval and his partner continue the dangerous downward climb to retrieve their food and fuel.
We got into a situation into some extreme winds, and I've been in some fairly strong winds, especially in the Himalayas, but it's the strongest winds I've ever seen.
Wind and fresh snow. It's the perfect recipe for a deadly high-altitude avalanche. They choose each step with great care in the blowing snow. It would be easy to fall off the edge of the mountain, never to be heard from again. They tread cautiously, knowing they'll pay for a single wrong step with their lives. The vibrations from a lone hiker can cause the top layer of snow to slide, setting off an avalanche.
The distance that we had to travel, if I remember, was maybe 400 meters, which is not particularly far, but it's very far when half of that is uphill. You're at this point almost petrified that the slope's gonna go. I put my foot down in the slope 50 centimeters in front of me, so just a couple of feet in front of my boot.
Laval falls back as Mount Logan begins to roar.
The entire slope just cut, sheared off, and the entire mountain just fell all the way down 9,000 feet. It was reverberating. You could feel it moving, like you could feel it in your boots. It was terrifying. I was within 50 centimeters of losing my life.
On these icy slopes, there's zero margin for error. They know they've pushed their luck as far as it will go.
This is the biggest avalanche that I've ever seen, and yeah, it was particularly frightening. At that point, went back to the tent. And we just waited it out. We felt trapped. Once you're up high on the east ridge of Mount Logan, you might as well be in the moon. You're on your own. It would be just about impossible to pick you off and rescue you if something went wrong.
Trapped on the mountain, they're sitting ducks. As their terror grows, they listen intently for rumbles in the distance. A second avalanche could trigger at any time.
Now we're in this scenario where we can't go any higher because we don't have any fuel. So you can't live without fuel in a mountain because you have to melt snow, and as you know, you need water. And we can't go any lower because of the risk of starting another avalanche and being swept off the mountain. It was a feeling of doom. It was a damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario. We just about got killed in that.
Days after his near-death experience, Lavelle and his climbing partner reached the top of Mount Logan via the East Ridge. The first time it's ever been accomplished.
When we got to the summit of Mount Logan, it was incredible. After weeks of hardship and freezing and struggling and you know, avalanches and ice falls and yeah, it's a fantastic feeling at the top. I had tears in my eyes.
But for Lavelle, reaching the summit was also a humbling experience. Mount Logan still haunts him.
I've spent my life in the outdoors, but just another reminder of how quickly things can change because of weather and how insignificant we are. If that slope would have slid 50 centimeters higher, I would have just been like a pebble in it, like a grain of sand going down the mountain. Nature is, it's spectacular, it's beautiful, but it's got a real bite to it, for sure.
When Mother Nature unleashes her awesome power, people are at the mercy of the wildest weather under the sun. You can run, you can hide, but sometimes you have no choice but to charge head first into the storm. Summer weather in South Florida is typically hot and humid. Daily thunderstorms are common.
Florida's coast is so volatile for storms mostly because of its location. It's in the tropical regions, and because of this, we have a lot of fuel from the ocean. A lot of heat that's been stored within the ocean. This fuels thunderstorm activity, particularly for hurricanes.
Thunderstorms may be common, but they're never simple. The jet stream, a fast-flowing air current about 6 miles above the Earth, drives tropical storms west to east. From the coast out to the ocean. These winds are especially dangerous for boaters, who run the risk of being pushed miles out into the stormy Atlantic waters.
I've basically grown up on the water. I've been on boats my whole life. I've been fishing basically since I could hold a fishing pole, so maybe like 3 years old.
And for me, it started as a teenager, and I haven't stopped since. One of the things I do as a professional sport fisherman is film all my adventures and post them on my YouTube channel titled Land Shark Fishing.
Brooke, how we doing over here?
We're looking good. Everything is set up.
We've probably spent thousands, if not tens of thousands of hours, would you say?
Oh, yeah. A lot of hours on the water.
What's going on, guys? Victor here, and today I am with Brooke. Say hi.
Hey, guys, what's up?
And today's video is going to be very different from what you guys have seen before.
Weather in South Florida can actually change really fast. So it's normally typically calm, but then during the summer, you have crazy thunderstorms and rainstorms that can come in. They can surprise you. You really have to keep an eye out on the forecast, but then at the same time, you can be looking at the forecast and it could say 0 chance of rain, and then in the afternoon, you get a crazy thunderstorm that comes in out of nowhere.
June 28, 2013 was one of those days. Without warning, a violent thunderstorm appeared out of nowhere. Before the day was done, Victor Lubin and Brooke Christ would find themselves trapped on open water in a near-death battle against the sea.
Brooke and I have seen hundreds of storms on the water. The bulk of the storms that we witness, they come and go. They're generally not that threatening.
And a lot of times you can see them coming and you can plan ahead for them. But this storm was unlike any other. Normally, I'm someone who's not really afraid on the water, but I was definitely afraid with this storm. This was probably the first time I ever thought that I might actually die out on the boat.
June 28, 2013, Jupiter, Florida. Weather conditions are ideal for a day of kite fishing.
Kite fishing employs a kite to get your baits up on top of the water. It allows them to give a frantic presentation, and it attracts big predatory fish.
Typically, if you're going kite fishing, you want a little bit of wind, because if you don't have any wind, then you can't get your kite up. And this day, it was going to be a little windy, so we knew we were going to be able to get the kite up.
Hope the weather clears up a little bit.
Yeah, honestly, I think that we should be fine.
There weren't any thunderstorms on the forecast, so we thought it was going to be a good day out on the water.
It would turn out to be anything but.
So it was around midday, we got the boat packed and headed out the inlet, and we headed out to about 120 feet of water, which is roughly 3 miles offshore. Surrounded by sharks. Lots of sharks out there.
But a threat far greater than sharks also lurks 3 miles offshore. The Atlantic Gulf Stream, a strong ocean current that ferries warm water up from the Gulf of Mexico.
This Gulf Stream fuels a lot of storms. You'll see in this stream that the ocean waters continue to be warmer compared to the rest of the ocean, and this is the prime fuel source for many storms.
When ocean water is warm, storms suck up the heat energy, the way a straw sucks up soda, creating moisture in the air. The warmer the water, the more moisture in the air, and that can mean larger, more powerful storms.
Hurricanes can be right over the Gulf Stream for days at a time, just feeding off of this warm water. So even by the time these hurricanes reach Bermuda, or even upwards to Nova Scotia, where they're supposed to be weakening, it's because of the Gulf Stream that they maintain their strength.
On the calm seas, Victor and Brooke enjoy the sun.
Brooke, how we doing over here?
We are doing awesome.
Oblivious to an ominous wall of dark cloud beginning to take shape on shore.
It was a perfect day out. It was sunny. There wasn't really a cloud in the sky. It was a perfect day out on the water. We fished for about an hour when I got to catch a sailfish. And during the middle of this catching of a sailfish, we started to see this storm coming from onshore. And it came really, really fast. The storm came so fast that by the time I had even caught the fish, the storm was on top of us. The first thing we felt is it got really cold. It probably dropped at least 15 degrees, and then the wind just started coming. The wind started howling, and then the seas just started picking up. This storm wasn't a normal storm. It was giant. It probably stretched at least 10 miles down the coast.
So normally when we see a thunderstorm, you can kind of see where it starts and ends, but this one, there was just no end to it. This thing was just building and expanding.
Winds from the Florida jet stream, blowing from the coast out to sea, grow stronger by the minute.
We were kite fishing, and you know, with the kite, it's really hard to reel against the wind.
Oh, your kite's about to go in the water.
And since this wind is blowing us now so strong, the kite actually ended up breaking because the wind was so strong, and we basically just abandoned the kite.
It's time to cut their losses. They need to get out of this storm now. On the Florida coast, a massive thunderstorm, fed by energy from the warm sea, suddenly fills the horizon. Alone at sea in a small fishing boat, Victor Lubin and Brooke Christ are trapped totally by surprise.
Normally, if a storm's coming, you have some time to prepare. You know, you see it coming, but this storm came within 15 minutes from being a perfect day out to us being absolutely scared about what was gonna happen.
It was just insane.
Yeah, we can't see land.
The storm was nearly as wide as the Grand Canyon. Making it even more frightening, it's blowing from the coast out to sea, meaning they need to head directly into the storm if they are to make it back to shore.
Normally, what I'd like to do is either run north or south along the coast to kind of outrun the storm, but we had no choice. There was no end to the storm. The safest thing for us to do was just go straight into the belly of the monster.
Victor and Brooke gun it for home. Straight into the 6-foot-high waves that crash over the boat.
It wasn't like we were in a giant boat. We were in a small 21-foot boat. So you want to keep the boat headed straight into the waves, because if you do go sideways, you run the risk of capsizing. So we had to go straight into the storm.
It's kind of a David and Goliath situation with our boat, you know, being David and these just monstrous waves being Goliath. And it wasn't just the waves. There's rain in your face. You could barely see the coast.
You can see land over there. You can't see land over here.
It was just a very scary, tense situation.
I can't see a damn thing.
We didn't know if we were going to run into a boat. There could have been a boat in front of us. We wouldn't have seen it. We wouldn't have known.
Howling winds, crashing waves, blinding rain. Just when they think it can't possibly get worse,
we must have seen hundreds of bolts of lightning. When you see it just striking every which way, there's no shelter around, it's really terrifying.
lightning is common off the Florida coast. High in the clouds, warm water droplets and cold ice crystals rub together, creating enough electrical charge to trigger a lightning strike. It's a deadly phenomenon that claims the lives of nearly 100 people each year in the United States, more than hurricanes or tornadoes.
The one thing that was running through my mind was just, please don't get struck by lightning.
There's lightning everywhere, and if the boat got struck by lightning, you're holding on to metal, and so you're getting direct impact.
It was a very tricky situation.
Terrorized by lightning strikes and blinded by rain, Victor and Brooke push their boat as hard as it can go into the unknown. There are no other boats on the water. They are alone against the sea.
We were probably running into the storm for 45 minutes to an hour, and it seemed like 3 hours.
We couldn't see 5 feet in front of the boat. It was freezing rain. I didn't know if we were gonna get hit by lightning. I didn't know if we were gonna capsize. I just had tons of emotions coming over me. I actually was crying. I cried, I was praying. I did not think we were gonna make it through.
I tried maintaining my composure because I knew how scared she was. I saw she was praying, I saw, she was crying. I just wanted to give her that sense of security, but on the inside, I was just as worried as she was.
After a hair-raising, hour-long push towards the coast, they finally make it to safety.
I remember finally making it into the inlet after coming out of the ocean. I just felt a sense of relief that, oh my gosh, we actually made it. We felt finally safe being in the inlet.
So a person who plans to venture out into the ocean on the day of perhaps severe weather, first and foremost, they should be looking at their local meteorology stations in order to assess for themselves, is it dangerous and is it smart for me to go out today? And if you are willing to take that risk, use the precautionary measures. Make sure that someone knows your approximate latitude and longitude so that if the Coast Guard needs to go out and find you, they will be able to do so.
In all their years on the water, Victor and Brooke have never been so fearful for their lives as they were on that day off the Jupiter coast. It was a day that would bring with it some hard-learned lessons.
One of the stupidest things we could have done is we should have had our life jackets on.
We were just so in the moment that putting our life jackets on was not the first thing that came to our mind. I learned that you can't take chances. The weather can change in a blink of an eye, and you always need to be prepared. We got lucky this time, and we did get lucky, and we survived, and so now we can prepare for next time.
I was changed by that weather. If I'm offshore and I see a thunderstorm coming, I don't take it lightly because I know that it could be another one of those superstorms. Don't take the weather lightly. Don't take the Gulf Stream lightly, because if you do capsize offshore there, it's not just the lightning, it's not just the sharks, it's not just the rain, it is the culmination of everything that just becomes a superstorm. There's no being a macho when it comes to nature or out on the ocean. The ocean takes what it wants when it wants.
When a hurricane hits, I really hope that you have evacuated and have heeded emergency managers. As meteorologists, we know what we're talking about. When the warning goes out that you should evacuate, go to a shelter that is designated by the government officials that is deemed safe. These are usually brick or concrete in structure, and these can withstand the immense forces of the wind, but also it's inland, so it's further away from the storm surge. In the event, though, that you are caught off guard and you have not evacuated, the best place you can be is inside. Put as many structures between you and the hurricane as possible. This allows for projectile debris from the intense winds of a hurricane to penetrate only one, maybe two layers of your house. But if you are further in, like an interior closet or even the bathtub, if you can put something over your head, like a mattress, you are safe in that situation.
Aviation and weather.
I couldn't believe it.
At times, a turbulent combination.
I could hear passengers screaming.
Fasten your seatbelts.
Most of the time you make it, but there are times when people don't make it because of pushing the weather.
Go, 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 go!
These are the stories from people who work in extreme weather.
Oh, just lost a big window.
It was just like a bomb went off.
And nobody is coming to save you.
And the storms they'll never forget.
Wham! Crack! Bang! Bang! Bang!
We're going to die.
Plus, the how and why behind the world's worst weather.
Mother Nature is one mother.
Weather conditions play a key role in a pilot's day. Snow, thunderstorms, lightning, dangerous crosswinds, all can turn a routine flight into terror at 30,000 feet. At any given time over the United States, there are 5,000 planes in the air, but only one Mother Nature. In March 2007, a run-of-the-mill journey from Cancun, Mexico to Halifax, Canada quickly turned into a nightmare. Passengers and crew were brought to their knees by extreme mid-air turbulence.
Turbulence is basically a rapid change of wind, speed, and direction as you go up in the atmosphere. It can be very, very dangerous. You're cruising along at 38,000 feet above the weather and then suddenly encounter these very, very strong winds. And if the pilot is not prepared, he can lose control of the aircraft, and anyone who doesn't have their seatbelt on in that aircraft is risking serious injury.
As a flight attendant, Michael Cruikshank has spent 18 years and thousands of hours in the air. He has experienced all types of weather, and all off the ground.
In the air, I have experienced rain, snow, sleet. I've flown over tornadoes. I have flown over thunderstorms.
Would you like a drink?
Hurricanes, blizzards, you name it, I've flown through it. But there's one weather event I'll never forget. I'd never, ever experienced or seen a storm like this.
It's getting worse out there.
This one weather event changed my life.
Cancun, Mexico. Passengers returning from a holiday in the sun board the plane for a 6-hour flight to Halifax, Canada.
So the day started like any other day. I had done that flight between Cancun and Halifax hundreds of times. That flight was a full flight, 136 passengers.
Seatbelt, sir? Great, thank you very much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you need anything,
We are just up front here, so don't hesitate to ask, and thank you very much for flying with us.
I'd flown with all these girls before. It was like a well-oiled machine. We all knew our roles. Everything was going to be a great day.
But Mother Nature was about to throw a wrench into the well-oiled machine.
About 4.5 hours into the flight, the captain called us and said that we were going to be having bad weather. There was a snowstorm brewing in Halifax, and it was getting worse.
Halifax, on Canada's east coast, has the perfect ingredients for wild winter weather. Warm, moist wind from the south and cold polar wind from the north. When they smash together, you get snow and turbulence high in the sky.
Wind causes a lot of turbulence. Air masses that are moving quickly in opposite directions. A simulator is a great tool to train our pilots how to handle turbulence and other weather events. We can cause everything from thunderstorms to what we call wind shear, when the winds change directions very quickly.
Dean Kramer trains pilots using a flight simulator to recreate severe weather conditions at high altitude.
I can cause rain, hail, snow, falling snow. Of course, we can change the turbulence, moderate to light, clear, severe turbulence. You're going to notice the oscillation quite a bit. So we go to this, and we actually cause very heavy turbulence, which of course rocks the airplane back and forth. You can see that things are happening as far as the aircraft is concerned. Now, Mike's not making this happen. This is the simulator doing this. He's just compensating for it right now, which is causing the aircraft to jostle back and forth quite violently as we're experiencing. And again, I can quickly turn it off and make Mike's day a lot easier.
The captain briefs the crew. Heavy turbulence is expected on the descent into Halifax.
Eventually, it's communicated to us that, okay, guys, it's going to get bumpy here. We went about our day.
Seatbelts.
Securing the cabin. Everything was smooth. Everything was great.
Hey, seatbelts, please, ma'am.
I just prepared for a regular landing.
Great job, thank you very much.
But as landings go, it was going to be far from ordinary.
And now I look out the window and I can see snow. I know we are in a brutal snowstorm. As we started to descend, it started to get a little bit bumpy, a little choppy. You can hear people in the cabin. People are talking, maybe a little bit more elevated due to the sound. As the turbulence is getting louder, the cabin's getting louder with the sound of people's luggage banging around, carts banging around.
It's a perfect storm, as sudden changes in wind speed rock the plane.
It's gonna be a bad one.
Yeah, I figured.
On a scale of 1 to 10, we're about a 6 now. So it's getting a lot worse. So So as we're being tossed around violently in this weather, I look out my window, and what do I see? But lightning. I couldn't believe it. So I didn't know what this was at the time. The next day, I found out that this was thunder snow.
Thunder snow is a rare weather phenomenon. Snowfall is accompanied by thunder and lightning.
It's getting worse and worse and worse, and we're only at about 10 minutes into descent, so I still know we have 20 minutes to descend into this snowstorm. I don't know what else is ahead of me. I don't know how it's going to get, but it's getting worse as the seconds go by. I remember saying to my flight attendant beside me, "This is bad, this is bad."
The turbulence, triggered by the storm, shakes the plane like it's a toy.
I've never been through anything like this before. It's violent. It's about an 8 out of 10. People are screaming at this point, absolutely terror screaming.
The pilot struggles to maintain his descent into Halifax as thunder snow electrifies the air around the plane.
I had never seen lightning in a snowstorm. I didn't know that this was even a possibility. The turbulence was bad enough, and now this thunderstorm.
So what is thunder snow? Thunder snow is literally a thunderstorm happening in the winter months. Now, it doesn't happen all that often, but the formation mechanisms for thunder snow are identical to the formation mechanisms that we have to get thunderstorms in the spring and summer.
It's a rare weather phenomenon that only occurs when air closest to the ground is warm enough to rise and form a thunderstorm, but it's still cold enough for rain to freeze and fall as snow. In a thunder snowstorm, lightning reflects off the snowflakes, making flashes even brighter.
When I've seen people react to thunder snow, it is fascinating to see their reaction because it's the last thing that they would expect to hear or see, that rumble of thunder in the middle of January, that flash with the lightning bolt, and yet it is something that we do see from time to time.
The passengers at this point are terrified. I can hear screaming, I can hear crying. You could hear the thunder cracking. You could feel it. Just feel the tension grow inside that aircraft because everybody who was being tossed around also now seen lightning. But then I heard throwing up. It was not a pleasant sound. And it was row after row after row. At row 18 to row 32. Every single person was throwing up on that plane.
Quickly, air sickness sweeps through the plane as the passengers are subjected to 3 kinds of extreme turbulence.
So the yaw of the plane, where they feel the back of the plane swaying back and forth. Then we have a roll, where the plane is rolling like this, side to side, kind of like on a boat. And then you have a bouncing, where it's up and down bouncing. We are having experienced all 3 types of turbulence. So the plane was doing this, this, and this all at once.
When we get into turbulence, a lot of the time it causes a lot of yaw, which makes the airplane's tail go back and forth. It's what makes people really sick. Again, if you're at the end of the aircraft, you're farther away from the center where it's actually turning, so it's actually worse at the back of an aircraft.
Mike can barely tell which way is up and which way is down. Now he too succumbs to the erratic movement of the plane.
Oh, I was throwing up. I was in the back throwing up. That moment in time, I wanted to be on the ground.
Finally, after 6 long hours, the battered airliner makes its final approach into Halifax.
We are on final approach now. I could hear the landing gear come down. I thought, okay, we're getting close. It's time. And then the imaginable happened. You can hear the engine spool up. And as a flight attendant, you know that sound. You listen for that sound. That's an awful sound to a flight attendant. We're going back up. At that point, the captain called and said, guys, sorry about that. We're going to try that one more time. So I thought to myself at this point, oh no, we have to go through this again. We're going to fly back up into this storm to circle around to try and do this again.
So some of the reasons why we aren't actually able to make the destination that we're trying to go to is we can have multiple things such as thunderstorms, which cause wind shear, which are of course dangerous for the aircraft to land in. We can have things where you get a lot of ice and snow, just like the highway on your car. You don't want to drive on it. Well, we don't want to land a 116,000-pound aircraft doing 200 kilometers an hour on an icy stretch of pavement.
Passengers and crew brace themselves for a second attempt at landing as wind pounds the plane.
We started our approach, 10,000 feet again, violent turbulence, shaking, rattling. The sound is something you never forget. The sound of brutal turbulence is engraved into my head. We started the descent again with the turbulence and got the spool up of engines one more time. And we had our second missed approach into Halifax. And I thought, oh no, what's going on?
The wind and storm make it too dangerous to land. Air traffic control directs them to an alternate airport in Newfoundland. But the captain gets a fuel warning. They're running out of fuel and time.
We had to fly back into the storm and try another airport that was closer, in St. John, New Brunswick. There was virtually no turbulence, and we landed into St. John, New Brunswick. With a plane full of puke and scared, nervous passengers.
Thankfully, no one was injured on the flight. Because the pilot was warned of the oncoming turbulence, passengers remained belted into their seats.
I was so thankful to be on the ground when we landed. To hug each other, to think, okay, we've been through that. That was scary. So this weather experience has changed my life. I never take turbulence lightly. When the captain comes on and says, we're gonna be in snowstorm, I'm prepared because this moment in time is etched into me. I'll never forget it. And that was the day that weather changed my life.
Although large commercial passenger airplanes can avoid bad weather by flying above storms, they can still be heavily affected by bad weather. But what happens to small aircraft in big weather conditions? Small aircraft are not built for high-altitude flights, so pilots are forced to fly alone through inclement weather where things can and do go wrong.
The real concerns when we're talking about flying smaller aircraft, especially in the northern parts of our country, is you don't have an alternate airport to get to. You are going to rely on your skills as a pilot to tell you where you are and a really good knowledge of the weather en route. Because the real concern is if you run into trouble in the north flying one of these bush planes, there's not a lot of ways that you're going to be able to land safely somewhere.
Laval Saint-Germain has been a pilot for 28 years. He's logged millions of air miles in all conditions, from scorching deserts to freezing glaciers.
In my career as a pilot, obviously I've seen thousands of different weather events. Hailstorms, thunderstorms, wind shear, fog, driving snow, you name it.
But in the summer of 1989, unexpected weather in Canada's remote north placed Laval between a rock and a hard place. More specifically, between nature and Mother Nature.
With respect to weather and memorable events that I've flown through, I mean, I've been an airline pilot for 28 years. I've seen weather all over the world, from Australia to the high Arctic. And there's one time that I really remember. This is one weather event that I'll never forget.
Almost 30 years ago, Laval was a young pilot flying in remote areas of northern Canada.
So in 1989, I was a young pilot starting out as a bush pilot in northern Quebec, in a very remote area, no road access. The definition bush plane is something that's particular to northern Canada and Alaska. And when we say bush plane, it is pilot jargon for sure. Generally, it's a single-engine airplane, and it's an airplane that can operate on wheels, skis, or floats. It is really a flying Jeep. It's incredibly rugged. It's made to operate in extreme cold. It's made to operate on very short lakes. It can fly at slow speed. It's just the real workhorse of the Canadian bush. It's interesting. As you progress in your aviation career, weather becomes, it's a determinant of a lot of things, and it impacts you in a lot of ways, but you're flying aircraft that are far more weather capable than the smaller aircraft you flew as an inexperienced pilot. So it's a bit ironic that as you become more experienced, the aircraft you fly are more resistant to weather. In airline aviation, you're outside of the weather other than for approach and landing and departure. You're above it. You're sitting in the high 30,000 foot range or low 40,000 foot range. It's always sunny up there. It's 99% of the time, it's clear blue sky. As a young pilot, though, you have to be more aware of, you have to have a better weather knowledge because you're always in it. You're always flying in the weather. You are in the weather, either under it or in it. You're always being impacted by the weather. So you have to have a good knowledge of it, yeah, for sure.
Laval is on a routine flight in his small bush plane when suddenly, it's the last sound a pilot wants to hear.
I heard a loud explosion coming from the engine. I could feel that the engine missed, but I was able to sort of climb up over the trees, avoid the trees, and I decided to keep flying. Because I was in a very remote area, I thought I'd try and make it to base.
He's still a rookie pilot, but Laval is able to guide his hobbled aircraft safely to his remote camp.
I got back to my base and looked at the engine, and I had blown a crack in the cylinder. And that can be pretty critical because the oil will come out of that engine, and if the oil comes out, the engine's gonna seize and you're done. The engine's not gonna run.
The plane requires an urgent repair, one that can't be performed at his remote camp.
So I called base, and as a relatively inexperienced young pilot, I allowed myself to be talked into taking this airplane back to the main base of the airline.
Uncertain, Laval takes off in his damaged plane on a 3-hour flight into the unknown.
I decided to do it somewhat reluctantly, but it was roughly a 500-kilometer flight with this sick aircraft to the base. And it was all over very remote boreal forest in northern Quebec. I wanted to impress the chief pilot and just get the mission done. Maybe with the overconfidence of youth, I decided that I could do this. My experience level was probably slightly higher because I had grown up with a dad who had airplanes. He was a private pilot, so I was always exposed to airplanes. We had Cessnas kicking around all the time, so I was always flying. I'd say I had probably slightly higher than average experience at that time as a young bush pilot.
Certainly when we're talking about weather hazards for small aircraft, for pilots that fly these small planes, visual flight rules for a lot of these pilots is very important, which means a knowledge of your surroundings, both in the horizontal as well as being able to see the ground below you. When we deal with situations where there's a lot of low cloud, we call stratus cloud, or in fact fog, that's no longer allowing them to see the landmarks beneath them. They may become disoriented in that type of situation. And again, if there's complex terrain around, hills or mountains, it could be a very, very dangerous situation.
Laval Saint-Germain is alone, piloting a plane with a broken engine. And now he has a bigger problem: the weather.
And the weather was lousy. Low cloud, very low ceilings. And in the type of flying that you do in the bush, we have to be able to see what's happening. And we have to see the trees coming up the hills, the lakes, and you'd be flying, looking out the window the entire time. No communication up there at that time in 1989, especially that low over the trees. So I wasn't talking to anybody. You're on your own back then. And no GPS, it was all following a map, precisely your finger on the map at low level, which means I'm just meters above the trees sometimes, and sometimes right down on top of the trees. And the reason I had to do that was that it was cold and the freezing level was just slightly above the trees, and every time I tried to climb up higher, ice would start to form on the airplane, on the propeller and on the leading edge of the wings. In aviation terms, what I was doing, that low cloud, we call it scud running. You're running in scuddy weather. Scud running in bush pilot terms means you're flying low to the ground, trying to stay out of the cloud, because the regulations that we fly under back then as bush pilots is you have to be visual all the time. You have to be able to see the terrain in front of you, the lakes, the rivers, the trees, the hills, and you navigate that way. You remain clear of clouds. So if it's low cloud, you're running right over the top of the trees, and we call it scud running. And that type of low cloud would be a low stratus layer, I guess is what you'd call it, with a freezing level that's just above the trees. Aircraft of this type, these bush planes, don't have the ability to fly in icing conditions. Whereas an airliner, for example, things are electrically heated, the windscreens are heated. You don't get ice on a big airplane, but on a small airplane, you're at the whim of the ice. But I didn't realize where the freezing level was, because where I was, there was no way to find out what the freezing level was unless I actually flew into it.
As the plane takes off and goes higher into the atmosphere, generally temperatures tend to fall. What a lot of people don't realize is that even in the summer months, in the height of a summer's day in July, it can be 30 degrees Celsius on the ground, but it can be minus 50 in the depths of one of these big thunderstorm clouds. So there can be still very, very cold temperatures aloft in the atmosphere, even in the height of summer.
The freezing clouds plunge Laval into sudden danger. Too much ice on the wings, and the plane could nearly stall or mush, making it difficult to climb or steer. It's too late to turn back.
I couldn't do a tight turn and go back because I had ice in the aircraft. As soon as you start to bank, you start to lose lift. And with the combination of a turn and the ice, I was worried I was going to mush into the trees. And I was only developing partial engine power as well because of the damaged... it's a 9-cylinder engine, and one of my cylinders was not working. I think with youth and inexperience and overconfidence, you think, well, it's only going to get better as I go. Well, in this case, it didn't get better.
Icy and low clouds, known as stratus clouds, hover just 80 feet above the ground. Laval must fly below them, but above the trees that soar 30 feet into the air. And if these clouds go any lower, they will appear as fog or mist, making this flight impossible.
So I was constantly battling between trying to maintain altitude, avoiding the trees, and not icing up. This critical little area right above the trees where I was able to maintain flight without making ice and not hit the trees. Sometimes the odd tree would hit the bottom of the floats, the top of the trees. That's how low I was. Often I'd be able to get right down on top of a lake or a river and fly right above the waves, which would keep me out of the freezing level. And when I have to pop up to go over a ridge, I'd be back into the freezing level. The whole time watching the oil and making sure that the engine didn't quit as I was going over any of these trees. Because if the engine were to quit, I'd crash into the trees. I was constantly searching with my peripheral vision to see trees coming up, rivers and lakes that I could lose altitude, get down over the water, melt some of this ice off, climb back over into the freezing layer, build up more ice, dive back down. It was a cat and mouse game. You know, I was the mouse, the trees were the cat, and the clouds were the cat, and safety was in that layer right between them. I guess I was, in a way, threading the needle between the two, between the tops of the trees and the freezing layer.
Low-lying cloud, or fog, is filled with supercooled water droplets. However, when temperatures drop and these cloud droplets adhere to the metal of an airplane, it's a flight or fight scenario.
If they encounter that liquid water in a cloud, it can adhere to the aircraft. If the drops are large enough, that water spreads along the leading edge of the wing, it freezes and makes the aircraft much more difficult to control.
So you could tell the ice was accumulating because you could start to see it forming on the wing, and you could just see the ice starting to pack onto the wing. And then as I descended, I'd be looking at the wing and watching it start to shear off, knowing that it would start to melt, and then I'd climb back up and it would start to pack on again. So the challenge, of course, is if I get ice building up on the leading edge of the wing, it causes drag, the airplane starts to lose lift, I keep pulling back as the airplane's starting to descend, and if I was able to continue flying into the trees, I could go into the trees in a controlled fashion, or it would stall. And if it stalls, the nose is gonna drop, and a wing will drop, and you go straight into the ground. Of course, it's fatal.
Desperate, Laval considers ditching the mission and trying to land on a lake. But with ice making the controls sluggish, he might not clear the trees. An emergency landing is only a last-ditch resort.
I probably had a 1,000-yard stare at times, staring through the ice and rain-covered windscreen, trying to avoid the trees and keeping an eye out for a place to land in case the engine packed in. I'm sure the seat cushion was traveling places it doesn't normally travel.
Finally, after 3 hair-raising hours of threading the needle, the icy cloud cover begins to lift. Laval is able to fly high enough to clear the trees without freezing the plane's wings.
I was just very happy when I came over the final approach into the lake and pulled the power back and touched down on the water. It was a big relief. But right to the bitter end, it was a bit touch and go because of that engine. It could have failed at any time. I still could have put it into the trees or into a lake somewhere.
The plane is no longer flyable. It's in urgent need of oil and repairs to the damaged engine. But for Laval, it's mission accomplished.
It was stressful and it was a lot of work, and I was exhausted. I had a real sense of accomplishment because I'd done it. And somehow I'd limped this wounded airplane back to base, which was what I wanted to do.
Pitched against unpredictable weather, Laval needed to muster all his skill, judgment, and limited experience to survive.
You're doing something where you're right at your limits, both for you as an aviator and the limits of that airplane. Pilots, we give the feminine attributes to airplanes. We call them her or she. And the registration was Juliet Alpha Bravo, and I always think that Juliet Alpha Bravo got me through. That bird got me back safely. What I learned about weather in this flight was how critical a few feet or meters can be to either success or failure when you're right at that freezing level. In hindsight, I wouldn't have done that flight again. I can sit here and talk about the fact that it was a success, and I know that all bush pilots across Canada and Alaska, for example, we've all done these trips. Most of the time you make it, but there are times when people don't make it because of pushing the weather. Pushing the limits of the weather, pushing the limits of the guy flying the airplane, and pushing the limits of the airplane. And, you know, I'm lucky to be able to talk about it. And that was a weather event that I'll never forget.
Turbulence, lightning strikes, thunderstorms, and low clouds. Extreme weather can threaten any aircraft, no matter what the size. And normally, airlines can forecast and plan for most types of weather-related turbulence, but there's one kind that's impossible to predict. It's invisible to radar, strikes fear in pilots, and can force passengers and crew to hold on for dear life.
Operating in the air, which is just like operating a boat on the water, it's just you can't see the water, which we operate in as air. The turbulence can come from the mountains, from weather events, from daytime heating. It's Not usually pleasurable to the people in the back, but we try and manage it as much as we can.
High above the Earth is a current of cold air so powerful that pilots don't attempt to fly against it, the jet stream. At the edge of the jet stream, fast-moving air smashes into slower-moving air to create turbulence.
So up in the higher altitudes, the jet stream will be moving sometimes at 100 to 200 miles an hour. There's no moisture in it, so it's hard for us to detect the actual weather. And if we go from calm air into 120 to 30 mile an hour wind, it can upset the aircraft very quickly.
The jet stream is a leading factor in what's known as clear air turbulence.
Clear air turbulence is massive air that's moving very quickly in the opposite direction we are, and we can't see it.
You can't see it, you can't detect it, you can't forecast it. But at 30,000 feet in the air, you can feel it.
Planes can experience clear air turbulence that causes it to drop thousands of feet. So if you're at 35,000 feet, it can pitch you up into the 40,000 feet. It could pitch you down to 30,000 feet. That's about 10 times higher than any roller coaster can do that to you.
Fabrizio D'Amico is a former flight attendant. March 17, 2001 was Fabrizio's first day on the job. And that was the day that a routine flight from Toronto, Canada to Mazatlan, Mexico ran into a perfect storm of clear air turbulence.
As a former flight attendant, I have been through hundreds and hundreds of storms in the air. I've flown through every kind of weather. I've flown through snow, I've flown through thunderstorms, rainstorms, heavy wind. I have worked in all types of extreme weather, but this is the day that I'll never forget.
For the other crew, the flight day starts like any other, but it's a special day for Fabrizio.
I'm going to start traveling the world and living this dream that I had always had as a youngster to be a flight attendant. It was a very exciting day.
Most of the passengers on today's flight are tourists, looking to escape from a frigid Canadian winter to the warmth of sunny Mexico.
It was winter in Toronto, but once we got up in the air, it was clear blue skies.
As soon as the plane is in the air, Fabrizio assists where he can. It's the final step in his flight attendant training, a procedure known as line indoctrination.
Fall out on you, so it might start like this. You have to make sure it's like that.
Line indoctrination is a flight that you do after your 6 weeks of training, where you go on board, you're in a uniform, but you're not an operating crew member yet. You are there just to observe. I'd observed what the flight attendants had done for their safety. I'd helped with the service. We were flying smoothly. It was busy, but uneventful, clear skies, nothing out of the ordinary. We were about 3 hours into the flight. We were 38,000 feet. When all of a sudden, this plane just drops.
At that moment, the flight path takes them through a subtropical jet stream and into a pocket of invisible clear air turbulence.
It was like being on a roller coaster, that initial first drop down. We were all thrown, and the seatbelt sign came on.
Seatbelts on, everyone, please.
And the captain said, "Flight attendants, take your seats."
Seatbelts on, everyone, please.
So the other flight attendant started to immediately try to secure the galley, and I went to assist her, and she immediately just shouted, "No, take your seat, strap yourself in."
Hey, buckle up.
So I did.
Fabrizio manages to get himself strapped in, but his fellow flight attendant still has to get the galley locked down.
Things are falling on the ground. jugs of juice, pop cans had fallen on the floor. This was so violent that they almost become projectiles. And I could see her struggling. She was in front of me, and I kind of had my arms out. And then this plane drops again, and she went up. And, you know, I had to grab onto her and pull her into my lap and hold on to her for a good 30 seconds because this plane was just shaking so violently. There was no warning from the captain that we were expecting any sort of air turbulence. It was so quick and so violent. For a moment, I was in shock. It was scary, it was jarring, it was violent.
Clear air turbulence hits without warning. Because the air is clear, there's no moisture for radar to detect. It's an invisible danger.
So clear air turbulence is probably the cause of most passenger injuries in our industry. Just due to the fact that things like thunderstorms and stuff like that, we know that there's going to be turbulence there. It's easy to spot, and we can give those things wide berths. With clear air turbulence being clear, we're sometimes unable to see it coming. And if people are standing or not wearing their seatbelts, and we can get into drafts that change our altitudes by thousands of feet in matters of seconds, that usually causes the majority of injuries in the industry.
The passengers and crew continue to violently rise and drop as the plane is buffeted by the forces of the unseen clear air turbulence.
And these drops were gut-wrenching. I could hear passengers screaming. I would imagine it was dropping a couple of 100 feet because it was violent.
Now, one violent drop causes the attendant to lose her grip and sends the duty-free cart wildly careening down the aisle out of control.
All of a sudden, I heard the other flight attendant shout at passengers to hold on to the cart. And I thought, hold on to the cart? This is not good. This could mean trouble.
When clear air turbulence hits, it hits hard. This happens when two bodies of air, such as wind shear and a jet stream, moving at extremely different speeds, collide. Today, with the introduction of tablet computers and flight decks, pilots now have real-time access to turbulence information and do their best to avoid areas of rough air. Although it can be sudden, turbulence poses very little risk to an aircraft, as planes are designed to withstand the stress of these conditions.
And I could see down the aisle, and I saw that the duty-free cart was in the middle of the aisle, while passengers were holding onto this cart that was shaking from side to side.
As long as it's loose, the runaway cart poses a serious threat.
They were able to get the cart up to the front of the cabin and secure themselves in. That's when I kind of snapped into what was happening, because up until then, it was so quick, I was in a bit of shock. There's no warning. We went from 0 to severe. It was just immediate.
The plane is rocked by wind currents on the edge of the jet stream as high-speed air collides with slow-moving, nearly still air. But 6 miles high above the Earth, the jet stream isn't the only threat.
So there's another type of turbulence that we call mountain waves. So as you're coming over the rocks, the high-speed winds that are up in the upper levels will go over top of the rocks. And as they come over the other side of the rocks, it'll actually roll off. And as we fly through them, we get turbulence. Think of it as going down a river in a raft. And as you get into the rapids, which are those high-moving waters over the rocks, much like the air is, then you get into turbulence except they don't have a seatbelt sign like we do.
Turbulence hammers the plane, now from two different fronts, the jet stream and mountain waves.
You could hear the engines were working very hard, and the captain was trying to fly through this turbulence, but it wasn't helping.
For 30 stomach-churning minutes, violent turbulence holds the flight in its grip. It feels like the plane is going to break apart.
Passengers continued to scream because, again, the movements were so violent, and you could hear that there were passengers that were being sick at the back of the cabin.
For a moment, Fab thinks his first flight is also going to be his last.
So at one point, I looked up the aisle again, and you could see the cabin was flexing from the weather. The turbulence was making this plane bend. Even on descent into Mazatlan, this plane is shaking, it's dropping, it's shimmying from side to side. It was still very violent. There was never a moment where it stopped, and I just kept thinking, just land this damn plane, I'm gonna be sick.
Because it's invisible to radar, clear air turbulence is impossible to forecast. Pilots do their best to warn other flights of the unseen danger.
While we're flying, we're actually taking weather observations, and if we see turbulence like we talked about, or we experience clear air turbulence or any of those things, we make sure we pass it along to air traffic control, which will pass it along to other aircraft around us, and then other aircraft can either prepare or go around that weather.
Finally, the turbulence eases up just before the plane touches down. Back on Earth, the weather is calm and clear. There's no hint of the hidden danger high in the sky.
We finally land, and as passengers are getting off the aircraft, they were green. When everybody was off the aircraft, you saw what a mess everything was. The cabin was a disaster. The galley was a disaster. It was like a tornado had just gone through the cabin. I was very lucky because I was with flight attendants who had been flying for many years. They were focused on what they needed to do. They immediately snapped into safety mode. It was because of them that I didn't freak out or panic.
For Fab, an exciting day turned into a terrifying nightmare. Trapped with nowhere to escape 38,000 feet in the air. It left him bowed, but not broken by the power of extreme weather.
It didn't deter me from continuing on as a flight attendant. It was almost like a badge of honor for me to say I had been through this, and I was able to come out of it fine. And that was the day weather changed my life.
I know a lot of passengers don't like to be delayed. We are passengers too, and we go on vacation and we don't like it, but we have to understand the safety of why we're delaying it, whether it be going for de-ice or delaying our takeoff, is we can't fly in some of these conditions. And also it takes a little while to get the airplanes de-iced. It's just like operating your car in the morning in a snowstorm. You're gonna have to give yourself a little bit of extra time to make it to work. Well, we take a little bit of extra time to make sure you're safe before we depart. And again, the safety is paramount as far as we're concerned before we leave. So how pilots learned to fly back in the earlier times, they basically had to take the airplane up and fly it around on wing and experience their training in a less safe environment than we can do now. And with that, they could simulate less things than we can do now. They had to take whatever weather came at the time, whereas we can simulate all kinds of weather in an instant. Okay, so this is daylight conditions going into Vancouver, and again, I can change the conditions in a heartbeat through this instructor panel, again, manipulating the weather to cause it to go into a white snowstorm. Again, we won't see the runway until we get actually closer to it. Although we take a lot of our environmental knowledge from our dispatchers and Environment Canada and stuff, the airplanes are basically mobile weather stations as well when they're in the air. They're constantly taking wind velocity, temperature, pressure differentials, whether it's icing, we can tell them whether it's icing in certain conditions, certain levels. And again, that all gets fed back to Environment Canada, which gets put into bigger models, which continually feeds the environmental picture to other pilots before they depart. So we're constantly giving information by the hour for other flights. We always have plan B, plan C, and sometimes plan A doesn't work right from the start.